Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. And this video I'm going to finish off filming the last set of orchids in this sort of mid-season update. It's taken so long, it's nearly the end of the season. But yeah, it's a matter of that set of shelves apart from the top shelf, which I've already done. Now I'll admit that because I move plants around, some may get filmed twice and some may get missed, but I haven't got time to keep records of what I filmed and what I haven't, so I'm just doing it based on the shelves and what's on them at the time I film. I got a problem with the car. This ECU doctor guy that I was recommended to go and find, he used to run his own business, and he stopped doing that and joined in with a company, and that company has atrocious reviews and has gone out of business, so that option's now closed. I've found another company that specialise in ECU work. There are various electronic control units in cars, some do ABS, but the main function is to rebuild and repair ECUs. That is their sole function. And looking at the pictures around the company, it's more like a laboratory than a flipping car place. Their reviews are good, but I've got a big decision, because first of all you have to send the ECU to them. You have to post it to them, and they do a test on it and then give you the results of the test. If they can find nothing wrong with the ECU, irrespective of whether there's a problem on the car, they just send it back and charge for the test. So you don't pay an extortionate amount of money if they don't do the work. If they rebuild the ECU, they rebuild it. Irrespective of what's wrong with it, they replace most of it, and they download all the programming off of it first and then put it back on, so it's still specific to your car. The risk is, if they mess that up, my car won't ever go again. It'll be scrap, because if the ECU comes back and it fails to work at all, I can't even start the car. And you can't get rid of a car in that state, you can just sell it for parts. So there's quite a worrying risk element. But the alternative is I just get rid of the car as it is and get something else, which means spending quite a lot of money all at once, which I'm always reluctant to do. So big decision to make. I think I'll talk it over with my daughter, because she's very sensible about these sort of things, and we'll weigh up the options. But I mean, at the moment I've still got the ECU. I can start the car, and once it's started it runs perfectly. It's a smashing car and I love driving it, but big decision to make now. Anyway, I need to get on with the filming. Big day as far as watering is concerned. I'm attempting, hence starting very early in the day, to water almost everything in here today. I've got things to do over the weekend that will mean my time in here is limited. So, well, let's get going then. I'll start with these two. Well, these two are going to get forgotten because these two move around quite a bit. This is my Rancoredes Bangkok Sunset. This was in bloom when I got it. That was a long time ago. I was complaining earlier in the year that this hadn't grown any roots. Well, it must have heard me. It's decided to do roots now, quite well actually. I mean, I'm very pleased with the amount of root growth. From nothing to that isn't bad going. It does grow, but so far hasn't bloomed since I got it. It's recently, through the winter, it grew this leaf. It's pushed up this one more recently, and it has another new leaf coming, so it is growing and it has now got roots. Whether it has a time of year it blooms or not, I don't know, but it certainly hasn't bloomed since I got it, and the spike that was on it when I got it was quite poor, and it's never bloomed since. Now this should be a regular bloomer, but I think the lack of roots really probably didn't give it enough strength, but it's taking off a bit now. This year it's done a lot better. My two Rancostylis giganteas have never done well. They just don't grow. Well, they grow, and one of them has actually bloomed in the past, but only one, and that was the smaller, weaker looking plant. There's 2 plants in this open basket. These things really do not like their roots in a confined space, but they do need a lot of moisture. They're a contradiction. I think it probably comes down to where they come from. They just get a lot of rain, and in between the rain they dry off fast. So that's what I try and do. Both of these go in the Vanda bucket. They get dunked daily this time of year. This one is quite dehydrated. Its last leaf wasn't too bad. It's got some marks on it, but I did have some scale on this, so that might be due to them, and it is currently just pushing up another new leaf. The other one is growing better. The last couple of leaves haven't been too bad, and it's now got another strong leaf coming. The striping effect on these is natural. The desiccation isn't. These 2 plants just don't grow well for me. They're very slow on the root progress front. Again, a bit like the Rancoredes. That's a Vanda cross with something, and with a name like that it may well have Rancostylus in it. It is possible. But this is very slow on the root front, and a lot of the older roots in here, if I point the camera down in there, they don't look that good. I mean, it has got some roots on it, but it's not growing good roots. I'm beginning to wonder whether this has got a more serious problem in it, or they. Anyway, I water it, and you know, it stays out here in the humidity and the warmth. It suffered badly when I had it up in the roof. It just didn't like that intense light. It likes the warmth, but it didn't like that level of light, so I brought it down lower in the place now. Seems to have greened up a bit better since then. But we'll see how it does. If it ever does bloom, the blooms are gorgeous and fragrant, but one has bloomed, the other one hasn't. So this is not a good bloomer for me. I'm beginning to think that I'm wasting my time with this one. We shall see. That's those 2. Right, this is basically the contents of my main rescue shelf. So these are not going to look good, but I've always said that, you know, if you film your orchids and talk about your orchids, you should deal with the bad as well as the good. You know, not everything's a major success, so that's life with orchids. Anyway, this one, the older part of the plant rotted, and I thought, well, the blooms on this are so good, I'll try and save it. It's just a, it was labelled as Cambria, so it's a no ID. But what I will do with these is those that have bloomed, which is the majority of them, I will pop a bloom up, because it helps justify why I've still got them. But I'm getting to the point now where the type of intergenerics that have got a high percentage of the old-fashioned odontoglossums in them, which are cool growers and do not get on well in here, I'm wondering whether I'm just struggling too much because of the blooms, and that sort of thing doesn't help. Look, right inside that leaf is scale. So, you know, this is part of the problem. A lot of my Oncidium types have got scale, and I can't shift it. I'm using alcohol now, but to do that I have to be able to see them. But I will get inside that leaf. Is it just that leaf? Yeah, it's just that one little place. But it only takes one, and then if that one breeds, you've got a little outbreak. It might be in a very small place, but nonetheless it can still do damage. Anyway, this has got quite a strong new growth on it, but so far that new growth hasn't pushed out its new root system. This one has got some roots. It's not completely devoid of roots like some of them might be. There are some roots in the pot, but whether that one makes it or not remains to be seen. But yeah, I'm going to have to get at the scale. I've been spraying them, but most of the scale around the base of the pseudobulbs, and the pseudobulbs are rock hard. So when you put a spray on them, you haven't got the systemic effect, because it doesn't soak in. All it does is a surface direct kill. And with scale, that doesn't always work. Yeah, it just doesn't. Certainly the adults, they're like a limpet. The liquid doesn't get in behind them, and because they've got a waxy coating, it doesn't soak in either. So the only way they die really is that if they take a bite out of the plant itself. That's if the systemic function even works properly with the weak wishy-washy rubbish we get given nowadays. Anyway, so that's that one. It's just a Cambria. What else have we got in here? As I say, most of these are not doing well at all. This is Melissa Briony. This was in bloom through the winter for some time. The spike lasted absolutely ages as a direct result of the cool temperatures. Your blooms do last longer, and this has got quite a lot of odontoglossum in it, and the plant was just basically so weak. Some of the older bulbs were so badly desiccated they served no purpose, so I took them off and repotted it. It is now trying to produce a new growth. This went in on the dining room table to be thrown out because the last new growth it produced just rotted off, and then it sat on the dining room table long enough that it started a new growth. I thought, right, this is your last chance. If that new growth progresses, then you can stay, and this is a sturdy new growth, so it seems to have just about got a hold. It hasn't got a good root system. It's not a healthy plant. Now this one's in exactly the same boat. So effectively, it's classed as Oncidium, but it's odontoglossum, an odontoglossum cross, and it's Golden Rialto. It would be very difficult to replace, so it's got to be worth a try. And the latest growth on it is producing some new roots, and it has got some roots down in the pot, but it's just incredibly weak. It lost its root system. All its older bulbs are badly desiccated. There's no strength in it. It may pull on with the progress of this new growth, so I'm giving it a chance. Again, I'll show you the blooms. Now this is the only one that isn't a rescue plant, and yet it looks worse than most of them. This is a very strange one. It's an Odontodia, and if I can read the faded label, it is Devonsiana, and I got this off a guy at the Orchid Society. It's known as the dirty Oncidium because the old bulbs go black. That's natural, so that's not a big deal. But he said it very rarely does more than grow a new growth and bloom. Now this did bloom for me. For such a tiny plant, the spike was probably 2 foot long and had over 40 blooms on it, and they're quite attractive. So this is not a bad example. It does tend to grow a new growth, and as I said, this one did bloom, and then it grows another new growth, and the leaves on the older bulbs fall. That just seems to be its pattern. So anyway, the new growth is coming on, slowly but surely. I don't see any new roots coming off of it yet, but anyway, it's not dead yet. Now this one appears to be picking up a bit recently. This is it's a very well-known Oncidium, sweet sugar, dancing lady type. It's no longer called that, and I can't be bothered to find a new name. But the previous growth did actually bloom. It's a while ago now. It's still kept its leaves, although they're not looking great. They're still there, so they're still functioning. And its latest new growth is producing some new roots. And just recently, some of the older roots seem to be branching. So I think this one will pull on okay, providing nothing goes wrong with this new growth. But it appears sturdy, and it is producing some new roots. So that one's sort of coming on, slowly but surely. Now this one looks worse than it is. The oldest 2 bulbs on this are totally desiccated. Effectively it lost its root system, and this would be difficult to replace as well. It came from McBean's. It's one of their own. Well, it's classed as a hybrid, although strictly speaking it isn't. This was once called Odontoglossum crispum. It's now called Oncidium alexandrae, because when it got reclassified there was already a crispum in the Oncidium thing, so they had to make up a new name. So it's losing its history, and this one has got a history. But the latest growth on it has produced some roots, not many. And I think somewhere, I've got a feeling, yeah, there is yet another new growth starting. So I think this one, although it looks really bad, it may pick up. So these leaves are in a bad way. But they're old leaves, they're probably not going to last too long. So I'm hoping I can keep this. This one did bloom not so long ago, and because I really wanted to see the blooms on it, I left the spike, and I shouldn't have done. It's weakened it. That will happen. If you've got weak oncidium types and into generics and you let them bloom, you do take some of the strength out of the plant. You know, the effort in producing the blooms and holding them takes a lot of strength out of the plant. Especially if you've got a very poor root system, you know, it's better to just take the spike off, quite honestly. And I was a fool. I should have taken the blooms off and, you know, kept the plant. This will be incredibly difficult to replace because it's, as I said, it's, well, Odontoglossum crispum crossed back with one of its siblings. So although it's classed as a hybrid, it's still, strictly speaking, you know, Odontoglossum crispum. But anyway, it has another new growth coming, and it's managed to hold on to its leaves, badly desiccated, and I really hope this pulls on. It is growing some roots now. Not many, and even some of the older roots are starting to show signs of life, but not in a good way, that one. Okay, so that was the sort of rescue shelf. There are still a few more rescues dotted around in this section, but this one is becoming a worry because although it grows like mad, it's probably got some sort of deficiency, and I'm not good enough to say what sort, but the basic symptoms are yellowing at the base of the leaf predominantly, but you have to bear in mind this gets fed with the same stuff as all the others do. It gets allowed to dry. It's actually an antelope type Dendrobium black antelope. It's all in the name, you know. It grows incredibly good, strong growths. It's growing at the moment. But even on these new growths, there is some paling at the base of the leaves. Given what I just said about feeding, the fact that everything gets fed okay, with the same stuff, that's a balanced fertiliser, bit of CalMag added in. This one, I've just looked at my notes, hasn't been repotted since I got it. And although the bark on the surface of the pot looks okay, I don't know what's in that pot. And for the size of the plant, it's quite a small pot. But that's not a big deal because it is a Dendrobium. Look at the size of that adult mealybug on the pot. See, they don't only get on your plants. Let me just, that's an ex-mealybug. Just the one. Probably hiding away from the heat. I don't see any on the plant at the moment. Oh well. But I'm going to put that to one side and repot that, and I'm going to do it today. Repotting it this time of year is not ideal, but it has got some active roots. It has got root tips, and it has pushed out quite a few alongside these two new growths that are pushing on. And it's in an unknown media with, I don't know, see that could have absolute rubbish in that pot, and it was just top dressed with some nice bark. So I'm being misled thinking the media's okay, so that's going to come out of its pot. Whether these paler patches can ever recover or not, that I don't know. But yeah, repot for that one, I think. If the media's breaking down, that will affect the way the plant can take on and use its nutrients. So it could be a root-related problem rather than what it's getting fed, which I would find highly unlikely. Anyway, we'll give that one a repot, I think. Kitchen time. Now these three are all Dendrobium latoria types. This first one here has pushed out an awful lot of new growth this year, and it's still doing it. So it's doubled in size. So its growth progress this year has been brilliant. It's Polysema crossed with Aberrans. And looking at the growth, it looks like this is its size. New growth over here, nice big fat bulb. Yeah. So I think it doesn't get any taller than that to any great extent, which is good. Guess which part of the plant got the sun? See, these are not highlight dendrobiums. They come from evergreen forests. They get a wet season and a dry season. Apart from that, they don't really get seasons. They like warmth, Latoria types. They don't like to get totally dry. And if they do get totally dry, it shouldn't be for any length of time at all. I do let them dry off in the winter simply because they're not growing much because of the short days, rather than because they don't want to. They don't have that type of season. But yeah, sun damage, bit of a shame. That was a new growth as well, that one. That was an older one, so it didn't matter so much. But the plant itself's doing quite well. It's put out a lot of new growths. The new growths are obvious on this. They're the ones with the pink at the base. And then they go green later. So I'm not sure that one's ever bloomed for me. I'd have to look it up. Oh, that's that one. This one is obviously going to get bigger during its life because its latest growth is quite a bit taller than the others. This is a relatively young plant. This is Alexandrae, and yeah, I mean the latest growth has done well. It's larger. You can see this was a very young plant. You can see the progression, different sized bulbs getting bigger each time until it gets up to this, and that may not be as big as it gets, but the telltale bump is in the tip, but whether it will, yeah, and in there and in that one. So that could bloom, but again, the Latorias seem to have this hesitation. As they mature, you can see the bump at the apex, and they can often sit there looking like that for some considerable time, and then at some point down the line, it just starts to grow and up comes the spike. That's just, well, that's from what I've learned, because I haven't had Latorias that long, that seems to be the way most of them behave. And this was another one, suffered with just too much light. I did have them on the top shelf. They appeared to be being shaded by other plants, but obviously the sun was getting through the gaps, and this one also suffered. I mean, that's an old bulb. That one did actually have two spikes on, and it's aborted a new growth, which is a bit pushed up this lovely strong new growth and then promptly dumped the leaves, but then the next new growth's pushing on okay. So yeah, strange one. That's Roy Tokunaga White Knight. As I say, it has bloomed before, but I think it may be a way off blooming now. Its hope really is that either one of the older canes may push on, and there's only a couple with leaves on, or it will be this latest one that's just opening its leaves at the top now, so maybe that one will bloom. But I have had blooms on that one a while ago. Now these three are a right mix. They are all Oncidium related, yeah, in some shape or form. This one, I've nearly lost this one twice, and why I keep this I really don't know, but that's really the reason I'm keeping it, otherwise this would have been dumped. When you see a healthy version of this, this is Roscioglossum Rawdon Jester. It's a Roscioglossum Grande cross, I believe. The bulbs should be almost twice that size, so the bulbs I've got have progressively got smaller. Yeah, I've got a couple of leaves, so it can photosynthesize. It has got some roots, and it is producing a new growth. Again, it's the blooms I'm trying to save this plant for. Although technically I could get that one again. It's not a rare plant. It does come up for sale quite often, but it's hasn't been growing well for a long time. It's got a lot of odontoglossum in it. It's a cool grower. I've got a decision to make in a minute. Ugh, camera all over the place. This is a Hamiltonara, and it's in the Oncidium Alliance, but you know, when you've got Oncidium types, if the bulbs stay reasonably plump, a little bit of crinkling's not too bad, then it's got some strength in it, and it's obviously got enough strength in it to push up a growth like that, which is a stonker. That's pushing on really well. It's got another new growth here from a different pseudo bulb, so it's growing in two directions. This isn't so strong, this one, but it's growing, and hopefully the future of this plant is in this nice strong new growth. So coming on, again, lovely blooms. This is the last of my wildcats. I did have 3 or 4 of these, and they all went down. And this one has no real signs of life. And it's guilty again. If you remember, this was in bloom not that long ago. Lovely bright yellow with red markings. And it was in bloom for a nice long time. And it's weakened the plant. You know, there's not much plant there. A rescue plant is better off producing roots and new growths and not flipping spikes. I may have lost that as a consequence. It is possible. It needs a new growth now to get some more roots going because it's got very few. So that's that little set. Now these two, last on that particular shelf. This was a gift, Bialara Joe's drum. This is a bit heavy on the odontoglossums, looking at the blooms, which are gorgeous. It hasn't bloomed yet. And when it arrived, I repotted it and it sulked. And it's been sulking ever since. But relatively recently, it started a new growth there and there. And they don't look bad. So providing those new growths progress and produce roots, the plant will be fine. But it is totally dependent on these two. Its root system is poor, it's a bit desiccated, and it obviously suffered from sort of stop-start growing in its past. That was probably as its roots were not so good. But yeah, I mean, it has life in it now. It has two new growths, and providing they produce a reasonable root system, they should be good growths. Now this one is actually a Miltonia species. It's Flavescens, and it's growing a lot of new growths. It's never bloomed for me, but with the number of new growths it's pushing up, there's no reason why they shouldn't bloom when they mature, or maybe it blooms when they're semi-mature. But nice new growth here. Another one here, another one pushing up the middle, another one here, another one round that side. So there's quite a lot of new growths on this. The plant's pushing on nicely, and the new growths are nice and healthy, and it's got a hell of a root system on it. That's quite honestly, for the Oncidium Alliance type, I think that's my best root system. It's a real potful. But yeah, I'm expecting some blooms on that down the line, probably staggered, because obviously this new growth is the largest, then this one, and then the others are following on behind. So it may be a nice succession of blooms with any luck. No reason why it shouldn't bloom. A Miltonia species should be happy in here. They're heat tolerant, they like good light, leaves slightly on the paler side, means it's getting its light right, yeah, gets fed and watered. There's no reason why that shouldn't bloom at all. Now this little plant is my only maxillaria now. I have had other maxillarias. I used to have that arachnitifolia, but that had a virus, so that had to go. And I used to have a couple of giant tenuifolias, but the version I had, although they bloomed, they never had that nice coconut fragrance on them, not unless you stuck your nose right in the centre of the bloom. So the largest one was split up. I think Danny had the biggest bit, and the others were sold on. So this is my only maxillaria now, and that's changed its name to Ornithidium. So strictly speaking, I haven't got any maxillarias. But this is Ornithidium sophronites. Has lovely little red flowers on it, lovely red as well with a yellow centre. They are tiny, but given the number of new growths on this, because it's growing like mad, in theory, down the line a bit, we may have a mass blooming on this one. I certainly hope so, because the odd bloom now and again, which is what it does sometimes, is not that spectacular. They tend to be quite down in the plant as well. But it's a climber, you can see it's nature. Was mounted once, but I thought I'd try it in a pot. Certainly grown on well recently, and still is. There's still new growths pushing on. So hopefully we get some blooms down the line. Now this is me being silly again and letting a plant bloom when strictly speaking I probably shouldn't. But I'll put a picture of the bloom up. That's why. And I got this plant because I was just stunned by the flower spike on it. The plant itself is not that happy. It is one of the Oncidium types that does tend to creep and has quite reasonable size extensions on the rhizomes, which means it moves across the pot. It's only ever grown one new growth for me at a time, but each one of those has bloomed, and the latest one, which is not that strong, has now got a spike on it. I really ought to take that off, but what's the point of having orchids if you keep cutting the spikes off? And this does seem to have a growth habit, for me anyway, of just producing one new bulb which matures and blooms, and then it starts another one. That's what it's always done. It's got some reasonable roots, so it's got a little bit of backup, so I'm going to let it bloom. Now this on the tag is Oncidium varicosum, which it no longer is, but it's variety Rogersii, balding. But yeah, with my own name in a plant, that wasn't the reason I got it. I got it for its blooms. It's an Oncidium dancing lady type looking bloom, but the blooms are very large for that type. And lovely brilliant yellow, and the rest of the bloom is nearly black. And the combination of colours just, well, it absolutely floored me. I just had to have it. So that'll be blooming down the line. Now this Dendrobium is on the very worried list. This is not natural at all, but those are old growths. It's been repotted on the grounds that I thought, well, it had this new growth coming, and I thought, if you produce reasonably clean leaves, I may keep you. And it does seem to have done that, so maybe it's going to rejuvenate. It's quite heavily deciduous, this one, so I mean these manky leaves are not long for the plant anyway, but this is the one that has the lovely orange blooms on. It's got a lot of unicum in it, so that's the style of the blooms. But this new growth seems to be okay so far, but if it develops this patterning, then out it goes, because it's got something wrong with it that's not normal. So it's on its last chance, really. We'll see how it does. If that new growth stays clean and the old leaves drop off in the not too distant future, maybe it'll be okay, but that's not allowed to touch anything else. And I always leave it to water last, with the last little dregs of the water, so that I can then throw the water away. Yeah, so it looks virus to me, quite honestly. As I say, this is not normal. So that may not be long for the world, but it has got a clean growth at the moment, so we'll see how it progresses. Now this is my weak Shari baby. In one of the other videos, my good plant was filmed, which I'm quite pleased with. That one's progressing quite well. This was 2 pieces when I split the plant, so there's actually 2 plants in here, both of which are producing a new growth. That one's got one coming up there, and that one started one down here. The older part of the plant is towards the centre. I planted that back to front, didn't I? New growth should have been in the middle, not on the edge. But I didn't expect this one to actually survive, or these pieces, should I say. So, I mean, this may end up getting dumped on the grounds that it's not that good. But if the 2 new growths push on strong, then they can be potted up separately in smaller pots. It's got roots, or they've got roots, I should say. Yeah, plenty of roots. So maybe it'll pull on. Certainly the other one did, because that didn't look too good when I potted it up, and since then it's come on great guns and turned into quite a nice plant, and will actually be blooming soon. But this is the tattia pieces, so these don't look so good, but maybe they will now push on. The original plant, before it was split, suffered the hold your hands up guilty, stayed in the flipping pot too long and started to lose its root system. Mainly because it just kept blooming, you know, so that was my own doing, but then it took a while to get going again from that sort of setback. This is the last one off of those shelves. This is a twinkle. This is the one that's called cinnamon, has the sort of autumny colours on it, and it's probably my favourite because it's the most fragrant out of the twinkles that I've got. I've got 3. There's a yellow one that's called Twinkle Yellow. And I've got a tiny twinkle, which is like a clone or variety that's a even smaller version of twinkle, which is quite a small Oncidium type. But this one has a shed load of new growths on it. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 round this side, and another large one here, 5, and another large one up the middle. So it's probably got 6 new growths, all of which will produce a spike. Some of them may produce 2. if it's got the strength in it, it will produce 2. It has that trait. So that's probably going to be sort of late autumn, maybe even going into winter before that blooms, because these need to mature and they're still growing on at the moment. But it's doing well. It's got a good root system on it. Some down in the pot and some all in round the bulbs. It does have that trait. Relatively recently repotted, so it can stay in there a while now. So coming on well, that one. Well pleased. Right, and the last 3 for today are my 3 Vandas. I'm not getting these down at the moment because they'll interrupt what I'm up to. They can be filmed where they are because they're giants anyway. The one on the right is the one that had the real problem in the winter and got some really dodgy leaf markings that looked pretty serious. Reason was never fully established, but I'm still relatively convinced it was something to do with the cold. But then the damage didn't look right for cold damage because it was more near the centre of the plant. But anyway, since then it did actually bloom. The blooms got frazzled, so I cut them off. The top growth is good, clean and quite quick. It's actually pushing up new leaves at a rate of knots at the moment. So it likes the heat, but the blooms didn't like that sun in through the roof. The one in the middle is the one that has the very large white blooms with the deep purple lip and the tessellations on it. Again, I had to take the blooms off, they got frazzled. It's pushing out a lot of top growth and it's pushing out some pretty stonking roots at the moment as well. They're enormous. Great big fat things. That's all well and good, but when it pushes them out at right angles to the plant, there comes a time when I now can't dunk that in the bucket. I have to put it in the bucket on its side and then turn it over and do the other side. It would be much better if it did roots like this that dangle down, then it can just go in the bucket. And the last Vanda, again, it's pushing on quite a lot of top growth. The 2 spikes that it had didn't last like they should have done. Again, probably direct heat in through that roof. As you have to bear in mind, that part of the roof hasn't got shade netting on it, so it is a bit strong in that area. So yeah, and looking at that, the piece of wood that the shade netting's fixed to has moved, so there's a strip down there that's no longer shaded. I need to get up there and put that back where it's supposed to be, because again that will be shining on plants that are not Vandas that shouldn't be having that sort of light. So anyway, that's the lot for today then. I may have missed some because this is the last one in the set, and I may have done some twice, but what I've done is what I've done. That's it. So that's really my mid-season update now. The next update along these lines will be the end of season, where I look at how the plants have progressed over the whole year and sort of think back as to how they were in late winter, early spring, and how well they've done. And that will probably be mid to late October, you know, when the days are getting quite short, temperatures have dropped off, and we'll go from there. So I hope you've enjoyed this little set, spread out over quite a period of time, because all at once is a bit much. And now you've seen the variety of plants that I've got. Therein lies a bit of a problem, because if you have an extensive variety, some of them are not going to be in their comfort zone. They're going to be on the boundaries, and they may not do as well as a consequence. But if you don't try, you don't know. And I've got a big decision to make now, because I love the old-fashioned odontoglossums. But as you've seen, they don't do that well for me. So I've got to make a real decision, is should I continue struggling with them or just give up on those types and stick to the ones that grow well and grow vigorously in the Oncidium Alliance types. So a big decision, because they're some of my favourite blooms, some of which you will have seen in this video. It's not a decision I'm making today, but I think it's part of that decision will be, once this heat's gone, the rescue ones, which is most of those odontoglossum types, are they going to pull on and become stronger plants by the end of the winter into next year? So it's a decision to make, but they don't do that well for me. It's such a shame. Anyway, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.